Incident File 019. The house is not far from the road. Small, wooden, raised on posts the way the older houses are. The door is not locked. In a village where nothing much gets stolen, an unlocked door is ordinary. What is not ordinary is this: it has been unlocked for years, and nothing has been taken. Not because there is nothing inside. There is a cooking pot. A folded mat. Clothes on a peg with the color gone out of them. They are still there because no one will go in. Children are told to stay away, and they do not need telling twice. They can feel it. Certain buildings acquire a quality when a village has made a decision about them. Ask what happened, and the answers arrive carefully, in the passive voice. She was known to be something. It was decided. She was made to leave. Nobody says who decided. Nobody finishes the sentence about what she was known to be. But everyone knows the house. And nobody goes in. Start with the ordinary facts. They are the whole architecture. She was a widow. She lived alone at the edge of the village where the paddy begins. She had no children nearby, or none who came. She kept to herself, not from arrogance, the neighbors would have said. Just her way. She borrowed things sometimes. Rice, in a bad month. Oil. Small amounts, the way everyone borrowed. None of this is strange. All of this is exposure. In a village built on obligation, on who owes whom, on who shows up when there is a roof to raise, a person with no household to trade labor with stands on thin ground. Not disliked. Not excluded. Simply unbalanced in the ledger, in a way no one thinks about until someone needs to. She was not the only widow in the village. That is worth saying, because the temptation is to read her as marked from the beginning, as if the village had been watching, waiting. It had not been. For most of her life she was a woman who lived alone at the edge of the paddy and borrowed oil. Nothing about her had to change. Now the story the village carried, given as they carried it. Not as fact. As a shape people held in their minds. They said there was a thing called Phi Pop. They said it had no body of its own. That was the essential part. It was not something you would meet on a path at night. It lived inside a person, and the person went on being a person, working the paddy, borrowing oil. They said it fed from the inside. That the host would not know. That the victim would sicken and the cause would never be visible. They said you could not tell by looking. That is the sentence the whole file turns on. The stories held it could be inherited, or received from a teacher, or taken on by accident. The versions do not agree. They did not need to. Whatever the route, the outcome was the same shape. It could be anyone. It leaves no mark. Only the sickness of someone else reveals it. That is not a description of a monster. It is a description of a suspicion. A suspicion with those properties cannot be disproved. It can only be aimed. This part is not dramatic, and that is exactly what makes it work. It begins with an illness. Somebody's child gets sick in a way that does not resolve. No fit, no scream, no scene. Just a child who is not getting better, a frightened household, a village with limited medicine. Somebody asks the question that has always been available. Not what is this illness? Who is doing this? That question is not madness. It is the question the story taught them to ask. The shape has one blank in it, the blank is a person, and minds fill blanks. So the village begins, quietly, to read. Who acted strangely, and strangely is doing enormous work there, because once the reading begins, everything is strange. A woman who keeps to herself. A woman seen walking after dark. None of these were strange the week before. They became evidence the moment there was something to be evidence of. And then, in a doorway, over rice, in a sentence no one can attribute afterward, someone says her name. Not as an accusation. As a question. As a wondering aloud. That is all it takes. Because the name, once said, cannot be unsaid. Remember the shape, you cannot tell by looking. There is no defense. The story had made that impossible years before anyone said her name. Here is what this file is about. It is tempting to say the village was mistaken, that they believed a false thing, a woman paid for it, and the lesson is about superstition. That reading is too comfortable. It puts the failure in what they believed. Look instead at what the belief did for them. A household had a sick child and no cure. A village had a fear it could not act on. The story offered what no illness could, a location. Not an explanation, a location. Somewhere the danger was, and someone it could be removed from. Once the fear had a location, uncertainty became something that could be acted on. That is the entire attraction. The village had not protected itself from what it knew. It had protected its certainty from what it could not prove. Because to withdraw the name would have meant admitting that nothing had been known at all. They did not need proof. Proof was never what the name was for. Nobody had to be cruel for this to happen. They had to be frightened, and they had to have somewhere to put it. The suspicion did not require evidence. It required a neighbor. What happened next was not a mob. That image belongs to other people's stories, and the truth is quieter and worse. It was procedural. Visits became shorter, then stopped. The borrowing stopped, in both directions. Then the distance became visible in daylight. A conversation that ends when she approaches. A path taken a long way around. Then someone speaks to her. An elder, or a few men who are not unkind and do not enjoy this. They tell her what is being said, and then they explain, reasonably, that it would be better if she went. For her own safety, some will have said. Some will have meant it. She has no argument. The shape does not permit one. So she goes. Sometimes to a relative. Sometimes to a temple. Sometimes nowhere anyone can name afterward. She takes what she can carry, which is why the pot and the mat and the clothes are still there. And then the structure closes. If she had protested, the protest would have been proof. She went quietly, and the quiet was proof. The child recovers, and the removal worked, the child dies, and they acted too late. There is no result that could disprove it. It is not that they believed it before she left. It is that nothing after she left could have changed their minds. There were other explanations. There always were. Illness moved through those villages the way it moves anywhere with standing water and no clinic within a day's walk. Fevers had seasons. Children died of things that have ordinary names now and had none then. A bad harvest sharpens everything. Hunger makes the ledger of who owes whom feel very heavy, very suddenly. And in a small village, old friction has nowhere to go. A boundary dispute. An inheritance that went one way instead of another. Any of these could produce a sick child, a frightened household, and a village looking for somewhere to set its fear. But notice the thing this file has been circling. Not one of these explanations was hidden. They knew what fever was, what a bad year was, which families had not spoken since the boundary dispute. The alternatives were all available. They were simply not necessary. Because a fever gives you nothing to do. A hungry season gives you nothing to do. An old grudge gives you nothing to do. The name gave them something to do. That is not a failure of information. It is what certainty is for. This archive holds files on things that hunt from paths, from the dark, from above. File 019 holds no such thing. There is no verified account of Phi Pop. No body, no track, no photograph. In the whole record there is only a story about something that leaves no mark, and a long list of the people that story was aimed at. Most of them women. Most of them old. Most of them alone. None able to prove a thing. This file does not close the question of whether Phi Pop was real. It is not the archive's question. Because whatever did or did not live inside anyone there, something else was demonstrably present, in the open, doing work, a shape that could be aimed at a neighbor, could not be argued with, and left the aimer feeling safer than the day before. That thing is documented. It is standing at the edge of the paddy with the door unlocked. The house is still empty. No one has proved what lived there. Everyone remembers who was made to leave. Incident File 019. Status, open. Cross-reference. In an Isan village, a sick child produced a question the story had always made available, not what is this illness, but who is doing this. A name was spoken as a wondering aloud, and it could not be unsaid, because the shape of the belief permitted no defense. This file is not about whether Phi Pop was real. It is about what a certainty does when it costs nothing to hold and requires a neighbor. End of file.